Chapter 52, Fields of Merit. The following year, Savatthi spent the retreat season at Nigroda Monastery in Kapilavatthu. The Buddha had returned to his homeland prior to the retreat after hearing about the conflict and unrest between the kingdoms of Sakya and Koliya. Koliya was his mother's native land. Princess Yasodhara was also from Koliya. The two kingdoms were separated by the Rohini River. In fact, the dispute concerned the right of the river's water. Because of a drought, neither kingdom had enough water to irrigate its fields. Both kingdoms wanted to build a dam in the Rohini in order to have what little water there was. At first, the conflict began as no more than angry words hurled back and forth across the river by farmers. But soon the passions escalated and farmers began to throw rocks at each other. Police were sent to protect the citizens, and finally soldiers were lined up either side of the river. It looked as if the conflict could erupt into war at any moment. The Buddha wanted, first of all, to understand the cause of the dispute. He asked the Sakya generals by the river, and they accused the citizens of Koliya of threatening the lives and property of Sakya citizens. Then he asked the generals of the Koliya side, and they accused the Sakya citizens of threatening the lives and property of citizens of Koliya. Only when the Buddha spoke directly to the local farmers did he learn that the real source of the conflict was the lack of water. Thanks to his close ties with both Sakya and Koliya dynasties, the Buddha was able to bring about a meeting between King Mahanama and King Supabuddha. He asked them to negotiate a quick solution to the crisis, because both sides would lose in a war, whether the loss was greater or smaller. He said, "Your Majesties, which is more precious, water or human lives?" The kings agreed that human lives were infinitely more precious. The Buddha said, "Your Majesties, the need for adequate irrigation water has caused this conflict. If pride and anger had not flared up, this conflict could have been easily resolved. There is no need for war. Examine your hearts. Do not waste the blood of your people because of pride and anger." Once pride and anger are released, the tension that leads to war will disappear. Sit down and negotiate how the river water can be shared equally with both sides in this time of drought. Both sides must be assured of an equal amount of water. Thanks to the Buddha's counsel, the two sides quickly reached an agreement. Warm and cordial relations were re-established. King Mahanama asked the Buddha to remain and spend the retreat season in Sakya. It was the 15th retreat season since the Buddha attained enlightenment. After the retreat, the Buddha returned south. He spent 16 retreat seasons in Aliva, the 17th at Bamboo Forest, the 18th at Koliya, and the 19th at Rajagar. Whenever he stayed at Rajagar, the Buddha preferred dwelling on Jighakuta mountain. Because the peak resembled a vulture, it was called Vulture Peak. King Bimbisara frequently visited the Buddha on Vulture Peak for Dharma instruction. He even had steps built into the mountainside that led all the way to the Buddha's hut. He also had small bridges built over the tumbling waterfalls and springs. He liked to leave his carriage at the foot of the mountain and climb up the stone steps. Close by the Buddha's hut was a rock as large as several houses and a clear stream where he could wash his robes and dry them on a smooth rock. The Buddha's hut was constructed of stone gathered on the mountain. The view from the Buddha's hut was magnificent. He especially enjoyed watching the sunset. Senior disciples such as Sariputra, Uravila Kassapa, Moggallana, Upali, Devadatta, and Ananda also had huts on Vulture Peak. The Buddha's Sangha now had 18 practice centres in and near Rajagaha. In addition to Bamboo Forest, Venavena, and Vulture Peak, some of the centres were Vibharavana, Sapa Sandika Pragbara, Satapanagura, and Indra Sharagula. The last two were located in enormous caves. Javika, the son of Ambapali and King Bimbisara, was now a physician, and he lived in a hut close by Vulture Peak, having become one of the Buddha's closest lay disciples. He was already renowned for his skill in curing diseases that have always been fatal in the past. He served as King Bimbisara's personal physician. Javaka looked after the health of the Buddha and bhikkhus on Vulture Peak and the bamboo forest. Every winter he organized friends to offer extra robes to the bhikkhus to use as blankets for warmth at night. He offered a robe to the Buddha himself. Javaka was interested in the prevention of disease as well as their cure. He suggested a number of basic sanitary measures to the bhikkhus. He suggested that water taken from ponds and lakes be boiled before drinking it, that the bhikkhus wash their robes at least once every 7 days, and that more toilets be provided on the monastery grounds. He cautioned not to keep food overnight for consumption on the following day. The Buddha accepted all Javaka's suggestions. Robe offering became a very popular practice amongst the lay people. One day the Buddha spotted a bhikkhu returning to the monastery with a pile of robes heaped on his shoulders. The Buddha asked him, "How many robes do you have there?" The bhikkhu answered, "Lord, I have 8. "Do you think you need that many?" "No, Lord, I do not. I only accept them because the people offer them to me." "How many robes do you think a bhikkhu actually needs?" "Lord, according to my way of thinking, 3 robes are adequate. 3 are plenty to keep warm on cold nights." "I share your thoughts. I find 3 robes sufficient on cold nights. From now on, let us announce that each bhikkhu will own only 1 begging bowl, no more than 3 robes. If more than that are offered, the bhikkhu will decline them." The bhikkhu bowed to the Buddha and then walked back to his own hut. One day, while standing on a high hill, the Buddha looked out over the fields of rice paddies. He turned to Ananda and said, "Ananda, how beautiful are the golden patches of rice that stretch to the horizon. Would it be nice to sew our robes in the same checkered patterns?" Ananda said, "Lord, it is a wonderful idea. Sewing bhikkhus' robes in the same pattern as rice fields would be lovely. You have said that a bhikkhu who practices the way is like a fertile field in which seeds of virtue and merit have been sown to benefit both the present and future generations. When one makes offerings to such a bhikkhu or studies and practices with him, it is like sowing seeds of virtue and merit. I will tell the rest of the community to sew future robes in patterns of rice fields. We can call our robes fields of merit." The Buddha smiled his approval. The following year, the Buddha returned to Jetavana for the retreat season. After Siddhartha came to Rajagaha and reminded the Buddha how long it had been since he had spent a retreat at Jetavana, It was the 20th retreat season since the Buddha attained enlightenment. The Buddha was now 55 years old. King Pasenadi rejoiced when he heard of the Buddha's return, and he visited the Buddha with all the royal family, including his second wife, Sabravakita, and their two children, Prince Vidudaba and Princess Vajna. His second wife was of the Sakya clan. After King Pasenadi became the Buddha's disciple years ago, he sent a delegation to Sakya to request the hand of Sakya's princess. King Mahanama sent his own daughter, the beautiful Risha Bhatratiya. King Pasenadi did not miss a single Dharma talk given by the Buddha during the retreat season. More and more people came to hear the Buddha teach. One of the most supportive lay disciples was Lady Visakha, who offered the bhikkhus her large and verdant forest east of Savatthi. Though it was somewhat smaller in size, it was no less beautiful than Jetavana. With the help of many of her friends, Lady Visakha had a meditation hall, Dharma hall, and huts built in the forest. At Venerable Shariputra's suggestion, they named this new monastery Eastern Park, or Pavama. The Dharma hall, located in the centre of the forest, was named Visakha Hall. Lady Visakha was born in the city of Badia, in the kingdom of Anga. She was the daughter of an extremely wealthy man named Dana Jaya, her husband, a wealthy man from Savatthi, and her son had been disciples of Nigantha Nataputta, and neither had felt drawn to the Buddha initially. However, inspired by Lady Visakha's devotion to the Dharma, they slowly began to be interested and finally asked to become lay disciples. Lady Visakha and her friends, Lady Shapiya, visited the Buddha's monastery frequently, offering medicine, robes, and towels to the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis who needed them. She also pledged to support Sister Mahapajapati's effort in building a spiritual center for the bhikkhunis along the right bank of the Ganga. Lady Visakha was an ardent supporter of the nuns, both in material and spiritual matters. Her compassionate wisdom was helpful on more than one occasion in helping to resolve minor conflicts amongst the bhikkhus. Two important decisions were made during a Dharma meeting that took place in Visakha's hall. The first, that Ananda should be the Buddha's permanent assistant. The second one was that the Buddha should return every year to Savatthi for the rainy retreat season. The first suggestion was proposed by Shariputra, who said, "Brother Ananda has the finest memory among us. No one else possesses his uncanny ability to remember every word the Buddha speaks. He can repeat the Buddha's discourse without leaving out one word. If Ananda serves as the Buddha's attendant, he will be present to hear all that the Buddha teaches, whether it is a Dharma talk delivered to a large crowd or a private conversation with a lay disciple. The Buddha's teaching is infinitely precious. We should make every effort to preserve and protect it. Through our negligence in the past 20 years, we have lost many things the Buddha has uttered. Brother Ananda, on behalf of all of us and on behalf of future generations, please accept the task of being the Buddha's attendant." All the bhikkhus voiced their support for Venerable Shariputra's proposal. Venerable Ananda, however, expressed reluctance. He said, "I see a number of problems. To begin with, it is not certain that the Buddha will agree to have me as his attendant. The Buddha has always been careful not to treat members of the Sakya clan with special favors. He is even strict and reserved with Bhikkhuni Mahaprajnapati, his own stepmother. Rahula has never slept in the Buddha's hut or shared a private meal with him. The Buddha has never afforded me any special privileges. I am afraid that if I am chosen as his attendant, some brothers will accuse me of using my position to attain special favors. Other brothers may accuse me of pointing out their faults to the Buddha, should the Buddha happen to correct them. Ananda looked at Shariputra and then continued. The Buddha has especially high regard for our brother Shariputra, the most talented and intelligent brother among us. Shariputra has been instrumental in teaching and organizing the Sangha, and it is only natural that the Buddha places a great deal of trust in him. Even so, Shariputra has earned the jealousy of many brothers. Although the Buddha always confers with several people before making a major decision, some brothers complain that Shariputra makes the decisions, as if the Buddha were incapable of making his own decisions. These accusations are ridiculous, but it is because of this sort of misunderstanding that I wish to decline becoming the Buddha's attendant. Venerable Shariputra smiled. I am not afraid of another brother's jealousy that may arise from his temporary misunderstanding. I believe that each of us should do what we see to be correct and beneficial, regardless of what others may say. Ananda, we know that you are careful and attentive in all your actions. Please accept this position. If you don't, the Dharma will suffer in this generation and for generations to come. Venerable Ananda sat silently. After a long hesitation, he finally said, I will accept this position if the Buddha will agree to these requests. First, the Buddha will never give me any of his own robes. Second, the Buddha will not share his food offering with me. Third, the Buddha will not allow me to dwell in the same hut with him. Fourth, the Buddha will not ask me to accompany him to a lay disciple's home for a meal. Fifth, if I am invited to a lay disciple's home for a meal, the Buddha can go as well. Sixth, the Buddha will allow me to use discretion in admitting or refusing people who come to request an audience with him. Seventh, the Buddha will let me ask him to repeat things he says that I have not fully grasped. And eighth, the Buddha will repeat the essence of any Dharma talks he gives that I have not been able to attend. Venerable Pali stood up to speak. Ananda's conditions seem most reasonable. I am sure the Buddha will agree to them. However, I cannot agree with the fourth request. If our brother Ananda does not accompany the Buddha to the homes of lay disciples, how will he be able to record things the Buddha says to laymen and women, which may be of benefit to future generations and all of us? I suggest that whenever the Buddha is invited for a meal as a layperson's home, he takes another bhikkhu in addition to Ananda. That way, no one can accuse Ananda of receiving special favors. Ananda said, Brother, I do not think this is such a good suggestion. What if the lay disciple only has the means to offer food to 2 bhikkhus? Apali retorted, then the Buddha and the 2 bhikkhus will have to be content eating less. The rest of the bhikkhus burst into hearty laughter. They knew the problem of finding the best attendant for the Buddha had been solved. They next considered the proposal that the Buddha hold every rainy retreat in Savatthi. Savatthi was a good location because Jetavana, Eastern Park, and the Bikini's convent were all nearby. It would serve well as the Sangha's main centre. With the Buddha in the same location every year, many people could plan to attend the retreat and receive the Buddha's teaching directly. Lay patrons such as Ananda and Lady Visakha had already pledged to provide food, medicine, robes, and lodging for the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis travelling to Savatthi for the retreat season. The bhikkhus concluded their meeting by agreeing to hold every rainy season in Savatthi, and they went directly to the Buddha's hut to present their ideas. The Buddha happily accepted both proposals. Chapter 53. Dwelling in the present moment. In the spring of the following year, the Buddha delivered the Satipatthana Sutta, the Sutta on the 4 establishments of mindfulness, to a gathering of more than 300 bhikkhus in Kamasadama, which was the capital of Kuru. This was a sutra fundamental for the practice of meditation. The Buddha referred to it as the path which could help every person attain peace of body and mind, overcome all sorrows and lamentations, destroy suffering and grief, and attain highest understanding and total emancipation. Later, Venerable Shariputra told the community this was one of the most important sutras the Buddha had ever given. He encouraged every bhikkhu and bhikkhuni to study, memorize, and practice it. Venerable Ananda repeated every word of the sutra later that night. Sati means to dwell in mindfulness. That is, the practitioner remains aware of everything taking place in his body, feelings, mind, and objects of mind. The 4 establishments of mindfulness or awareness. First, the practitioner observes his body, his breath, the 4 bodily postures of walking, standing, lying, and sitting. Bodily actions such as going forward and backward, looking, putting on robes, eating, drinking, using the toilet, speaking and washing robes. The parts of the body such as hair, teeth, sinews, bones, internal organs, marrow, intestines, saliva and sweat. The elements which compose the body, such as water, air, and heat. The stages of the body's decay from the time it dies to when the bones turn to dust. While observing the body, the practitioner is aware of all details concerning the body. For example, while breathing in, the practitioner knows he is breathing in. Breathing out, he knows he is breathing out. Breathing in and making his whole body calm and at peace. The practitioner knows he is breathing in and making his body calm and at peace. Walking, the practitioner knows he is walking. Sitting, the practitioner knows he is sitting. Performing movements such as putting on robes or drinking water, the practitioner knows he is putting on robes or drinking water. The contemplation of the body is not realized only during the movements of sitting meditation, but throughout the entire day, including the moments one is begging, eating, and washing one's bowl. In the contemplation of feelings, the practitioner contemplates the feelings as they arise, develop, and fade. Feelings which are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Feelings can have as their source either the body or the mind. When he feels pain from a toothache, the practitioner is aware that he feels pain from a toothache. When he is happy because he has received praise, the practitioner is aware that he is happy because he has received praise. The practitioner looks deeply in order to calm and quiet every feeling, in order to clearly see the source which gives rise to feelings. The contemplation of feelings does not take place only during the moments of sitting meditation. It is practiced throughout the day. In the contemplation of mind, the practitioner contemplates the presence of his mental state. Craving, he knows he is craving. Not craving, he knows he is not craving. Angry or drowsy, he knows he is angry or drowsy. Not angry or drowsy, he knows he is not angry or drowsy. Centered or distracted, he knows he is centered or distracted. Whether he is open-minded, close-minded, blocked, concentrated, or enlightened, the practitioner knows at once. And if he is not experienced in any of these states, the practitioner also knows at once. The practitioner recognizes and is aware of every mental state which arises within him in the present moment. In the contemplation of the objects of mind, the practitioner contemplates the 5 hindrances to liberation: sense desire, ill will, drowsiness, agitation, and doubt. Whether they are present, the 5 skandhas, which comprise a person: body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. The 6 sense organs and the 6 sense objects. The 7 factors of awakening: full attention, investigating dharmas, energy, joy, ease, concentration, and letting go. And the 4 noble truths: the existence of suffering, the cause of suffering, liberating from suffering, and the path that leads to the liberation from suffering. These are all objects of the mind, and they contain all dharmas. The Buddha carefully explained each of the 4 establishments. He said that whoever practiced these 4 establishments for 7 years would attain emancipation. He added that anyone who practiced them for 7 months could also attain emancipation. He said that even practicing these 4 contemplations for 7 days, one could attain emancipation. During a Dharma discussion, Venerable Assaji reminded the community that this was not the first time the Buddha had taught the 4 establishments of mindfulness. He had in fact spoken about them on several occasions, but this was the first time he had compiled all of his previous teachings on the subject in so complete and thorough a way. Assaji agreed with Shariputra that this sutra should be memorized, recited, and practiced by every bhikkhu and bhikkhuni. When the Buddha returned to Jetavana towards the end of spring that year, he met and transformed a notorious murderer named Angulimala. One morning when the Buddha entered Savatthi, it seemed like a ghost town. All doors were bolted shut. No one was on the streets. The Buddha stood in front of a home where he normally received food offerings. The door opened a crack, and seeing it was the Buddha, the owner hastily ran out and invited him to enter. Once inside, the owner latched the door and invited the Buddha to sit. He suggested the Buddha remain to eat his meal inside the house. He said, "Lord, it is very dangerous to go outdoors today." The murderer, Angulimala, has been seen in these parts. They say he has killed many people in other cities. Every time he kills someone, he cuts off one of their fingers and adds it to a string he wears around his neck. They say that once he has killed 100 people, and his talisman of 100 fingers hanging round his neck, he will gain even more terrible, evil powers. It is strange, he never steals anything from the people he murders. King Pasenadi has organized a brigade of soldiers and police to hunt him down. The Buddha asked, why must the king enlist the aid of an entire brigade of soldiers to hunt down just one man? Respected Gautama, Angulimala is very dangerous. He possesses phenomenal fighting skills. Once he overcame 40 men who surrounded him on a street. He killed most of them. The survivors had to flee for their lives. Angulimala is said to hide out in Jelani forest. No one dares pass by there anymore. Not long ago, 20 armed police entered the forest to try to capture him. Only 2 came out alive. Now that Angulimala has been spotted in the city, no one dares go out to work or to shop. The Buddha thanked the man for telling him about Angulimala, then stood up to take his leave. The man implored the Buddha to remain safely inside, but the Buddha refused. He said that he could only preserve the trust of the people by continuing to do his begging as usual. As the Buddha walked slowly and mindfully down the street, he suddenly heard the sound of steps running behind him in the distance. He knew it was Angulimala, but he felt no fear. He continued to take slow steps, aware of everything taking place within and outside of him. Angulimala shouted, "Stop, monk, stop!" The Buddha continued taking slow steps. He knew from the sound of Angulimala's footsteps that he had slowed down to a brisk walk and was not far behind him. Although the Buddha was now 56 years old, his sight and hearing were keener than ever. He held nothing but his begging bowl. He smiled as he recollected how quick and agile he had been in martial arts as a young prince. The other young men were never able to deliver him a blow. The Buddha knew that Angulimala was very close now and was surely carrying a weapon. The Buddha continued to walk with ease. When Angulimala caught up with the Buddha, he walked alongside him and said, "I told you to stop, monk. Why don't you stop?" The Buddha continued to walk as he said, "Angulimala, I stopped a long time ago. It is you who have not stopped." Angulimala was startled by the Buddha's unusual reply. He blocked the Buddha's path, forcing the Buddha to stop. The Buddha looked into Angulimala's eyes. Again, Angulimala was startled. The Buddha's eyes shone like 2 stars. Angulimala had never encountered someone who radiated such serenity and ease. Everyone else always ran away from him in terror. Why didn't this monk show any fear? The Buddha was looking at him as if he were a friend or brother. The Buddha had said Angulimala's name, so it was clear that he knew who Angulimala was. Surely he knew about his treacherous deeds. How could he remain so calm and relaxed when faced with a murderer? Suddenly, Angulimala felt he could no longer bear the Buddha's kind and gentle gaze. He said, "Monk, You said you stopped a long time ago, but you were still walking. You said I was the one who had not stopped. What did you mean by that? The Buddha replied, Angulimala, I stopped committing acts that cause suffering to other living beings a long time ago. I have learned to protect life, the life of all beings, not just humans. Angulimala, all living beings want to live. All fear death. We must nurture a heart of compassion and protect the lives of all beings. Human beings do not love each other. Why should I love other people? Humans are cruel and deceptive. I will not rest until I have killed them all. The Buddha spoke gently. Angulimala, I know you have suffered deeply at the hands of other humans. Sometimes humans can be most cruel. Such cruelty is the result of ignorance, hatred, desire, and jealousy. But humans can also be understanding and compassionate. Have you ever met a bhikkhu before? Bhikkhus vow to protect the lives of all other beings. They vow to overcome desire, hatred, and ignorance. There are many people, not just bhikkhus, whose lives are based on understanding and love. Angulimala, there may be cruel people in this world, but there are also many kind people. Do not be blinded. My path can transform cruelty into kindness. Hatred is the path you are now on. You should stop. Choose the path of forgiveness and understanding and love instead. Angulimala was moved by the monk's word, yet his mind was thrown into confusion as well, and suddenly he felt as if he had been cut open and salt thrown on the open wound. He could see that the Buddha spoke from love. There was no hatred in the Buddha, no aversion. The monk looked at Angulimala as if he considered him a whole person, worthy of respect. Could this monk be the very Gautama he had heard people praise? The one they called the Buddha? Angulimala asked, Are you the monk Gautama? The Buddha nodded. Angulimala said, It is a pity I did not meet you sooner. I have gone too far already on my path of destruction. It is no longer possible to turn back. But the Buddha said, No, Angulimala, it is never too late to do a good act. What good act could I possibly do? Stop traveling the road of hatred and violence. That would be the greatest act of all. Angulimala, though the sea of suffering is immense, look back and you will see the shore. Gautama, even if I wanted to, I could not turn back now. No one would let me live in peace after all that I have done. The Buddha grasped Angulimala's hand and said, Angulimala, I will protect you if you vow to abandon your mind of hatred and devote yourself to the study and practice of the way. Take the vow to begin anew and serve others. It is easy to see you are a man of intelligence. I have no doubt that you could succeed on the path of realization. Angulimala knelt before the Buddha. He removed the sword strapped to his back, placed it on the earth, and prostrated himself at the Buddha's feet. He covered his face in his hands and began to sob. After a long time, he looked up and said, I vow to abandon my evil ways. I will follow you and learn compassion from you. I beg you to accept me as your disciple. At that very moment, Venerable Shariputra, Ananda, Upali, Kimbala, and several other bhikkhus arrived on the scene. They surrounded the Buddha and Angulimala. Seeing the Buddha safe and Angulimala preparing to take the refuges, their hearts rejoiced. The Buddha asked Ananda to give him an extra set of robes. He told Shariputra to ask the next house if they could borrow a razor for Upali to shave Angulimala's head. Angulimala was ordained right there and then. He knelt down, recited the 3 refuges, and were given the precepts by Upali. Afterwards, they returned to Jetavana together. Over the next 10 days, Upali and Shariputra taught Angulimala about the practice of the precepts, the practice of meditation, and the way of begging. Angulimala made a greater effort than any other bhikkhu before him. Even the Buddha was astonished at his transformation. When he visited Angulimala 2 weeks after his ordination, Angulimala radiated serenity and stability, and so rare a gentleness that the other bhikkhus called him Visakha, which means non-violent one. It had in fact been his name at birth. Savatthi found it most fitting name for him, for outside of the Buddha there was no other bhikkhu whose gaze was more filled with kindness. One morning the Buddha entered Savatthi to beg, accompanied by 50 other bhikkhus, including Bhikkhu Visakha. As they reached the city gates, they met King Pasenadi, mounted on a steed, leading a battalion of soldiers. The king and his generals were dressed in full fighting gear. When the king saw the Buddha, he dismounted and bowed. The Buddha asked, "Majesty, has something happened? Has another kingdom invaded your borders?" The king replied, No one has invaded Kosala. I have gathered these soldiers to capture the murderer, Angulimala. He is extremely dangerous. No one has yet been able to bring him to justice. He was seen in the city just 2 weeks ago. My people are still living in constant fear. The Buddha asked, "Are you sure Angulimala is really that dangerous?" The king said, "Lord, Angulimala is a danger to every man, woman, and child. I cannot rest until he is found and killed." The Buddha asked, "If Angulimala repented his ways and vowed never to kill again, if he took the vows of a bhikkhu and respected all living beings, would you still need to capture and kill him?" "Lord, if Angulimala became your disciple and followed the precepts against killing, if he lived the pure and harmless life of a bhikkhu, my happiness would know no bounds. Not only would I spare his life and grant him freedom, I would offer him robes, food, and medicine, but I hardly think such a thing will come to pass." The Buddha pointed to Visakha, standing behind him, and said, "Your Majesty, this monk is none other than Angulimala. He has taken the precepts of a bhikkhu. He has become a new man in these past 2 weeks." King Pasenadi was horrified when he realized he was standing so close to the notorious killer. The Buddha said, "There is no need to fear him, Your Majesty. Bhikkhu Angulimala is gentler than a handful of earth. We call him Visakha now." The king stared long and hard at Ahimsaka, then bowed to him. He asked, "Respected monk, what family were you born in? What was your father's name?" "Your Majesty, my father's name was Gaga. My mother was Mantani." "Bhikkhu Gaga Mantani Puta, allow me to offer you robes and food and medicine." Hamsaka answered, "Thank you, Your Majesty, but I have 3 robes already. I receive my food each day by begging, and I have no need for medicine at present. Please accept my heartfelt gratitude for your offer." The king bowed again to the new bhikkhu and then turned to the Buddha. "Enlightened Master, your virtue is truly wondrous. You bring peace and well-being to situations no one else can. What others fail to resolve by force and violence, you resolve by your great virtue. Let me express my profound gratitude." The king departed after informing his generals they could disband the troops and everyone could return to their regular duties.